In January 1994, the bustling streets of Houston, Texas, became the backdrop for a tragic event that would reverberate across two nations. Edgar Tamayo Arias, a 27-year-old Mexican national, was involved in a robbery outside a local nightclub when he crossed paths with 24-year-old Houston police officer Patrick Gaddis. What began as a routine arrest turned deadly in an instant. Tamayo, handcuffed and sitting in a patrol car, pulled out a concealed .380 caliber pistol and shot Officer Gaddis in the back of the head. The impact sent the patrol car crashing into a nearby house, leaving the community in shock and mourning. Officer Gaddis, a devoted husband and soon-to-be father, had lost his life in the line of duty, his dreams and future cut tragically short. Tamayo, who had a history of violent crimes in both the U.S. and Mexico, was arrested and tried for capital murder. His defense argued that he had a low IQ and was denied proper consular access, violations that would later make his case a matter of international controversy. Despite appeals and last-minute pleas from Mexico and the U.S. State Department, the Supreme Court declined to intervene. Years later, on January 22, 2014, Edgar Tamayo Arias was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville Unit in Texas. He did not request a last meal, and when asked if he had any final words, he simply shook his head and said, "No." To understand how a violent act in the streets of Houston escalated into an international legal dispute and ended with a death sentence, we have to go back to the beginning. But first, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell because this story doesn't just recount a murder. It explores justice, diplomacy, and the lives forever changed by one fateful night. The crime. The night of the murder, visuals. Reenactment footage shows the dimly lit streets outside the Topaz nightclub in Houston on the night of January 31st, 1994, with shadows stretching across the pavement as patrons leave the establishment, sirens wailing faintly in the distance. Narration. On that fateful night, Officer Patrick Addis, a 24-year-old dedicated Houston police officer, responded to a routine robbery call at the Topaz nightclub, unaware that the arrest he was about to make would cost him his life as he confronted Edgar Tamayo Arias and another suspect, handcuffed them, and placed them in the patrol car, only for Tamayo, in a chillingly calculated move, to produce a hidden .380 caliber pistol and fire a fatal shot into the back of Officer Gaddis's head, instantly transforming a routine night of law enforcement into a scene of unimaginable tragedy. Interviews. Law enforcement experts explain in painstaking detail how officers are trained to secure suspects, and the extreme rarity of an assailant managing to conceal and discharge a weapon while handcuffed, highlighting the unexpected, almost impossible nature of the attack and the split-second decisions that follow in such life-and-death situations. The aftermath. Grainy news footage and photographs depict the patrol car crushed into the corner of a residential home, debris scattered across the street, police tape cordoning off the scene, and emergency responders rushing to secure the area. Narration. The violent impact sent the patrol car careening into the side of a house, leaving the community in shock and confusion as Tamayo attempted to flee the chaotic scene on foot, but was swiftly apprehended a short distance away, while neighbors and first responders grappled with the immediate horror of seeing a young, promising officer gunned down in cold blood, a brutal reminder of how quickly routine law enforcement can spiral into tragedy. Interviews. First responders and eyewitnesses recount in vivid detail the moments after the shooting, the shattered patrol car, the frantic calls for medical assistance, the emotional weight of processing the death of a dedicated officer in real time, and the profound sense of loss and fear that rippled through the local community that night. The victim, Officer Gaddis's background. A series of poignant photographs and home video clips show Officer Patrick Gaddis smiling with his young wife, sharing laughter with family, participating in Houston Police Department training exercises, and enjoying quiet moments with friends, interspersed with shots of his patrol car and badge as symbols of his dedication to service. Narration. Patrick Gaddis was more than just a uniformed officer. At just 24 years old, he was a devoted husband, awaiting the birth of his first child, a man whose life was filled with the promise of family, community, and public service. Yet all of that potential and joy was abruptly and tragically cut short in the line of duty, leaving a young wife, unborn child, family, and an entire community grappling with grief, shock, and the incomprehensible loss of a life so dedicated to protecting others. Interviews. Colleagues recall Gaddis's work ethic, commitment to his fellow officers, and compassionate nature, while family members share intimate memories, from his laugh and sense of humor to his unwavering sense of duty, painting a vivid portrait of a young man whose professional and personal life embodied hope, promise, and integrity. The funeral and legacy. Footage captures the solemn procession into Second Baptist Church, with uniformed officers, family members, and community members filing past floral arrangements and ceremonial flags, intercut with close-ups of tearful mourners, photographs of Gaddis, and footage of the empty patrol car draped in black. Narration. In the days following his murder, hundreds gathered at Second Baptist Church to honor the life and service of Officer Gaddis, as Reverend David Dixon solemnly proclaimed, "We're here today to celebrate the life of this young man who died so bravely serving his community, encapsulating the sorrow, respect, and admiration felt by all who knew him, while the tragedy reverberated across Houston and beyond, solidifying his legacy as a young officer whose courage and sacrifice would never be forgotten." Interviews. Community leaders and law enforcement officials reflect in detail on Gaddis's impact, how his dedication inspired fellow officers, strengthened community bonds, and left a lasting mark on Houston, emphasizing the human cost of violent crime and the profound void left by his untimely death. The trial. Courtroom sketches capture the tense atmosphere of the trial, showing Edgar Tamayo Arias sitting with his legal team, prosecutors presenting evidence, and the judge overseeing proceedings, while close-ups of legal documents, arrest records, and forensic reports emphasize the meticulous nature of the case. Narration. Edgar Tamayo Arias faced charges of capital murder and aggravated robbery in a trial that would determine not only his fate, but also become a focal point for broader questions about justice, as he made the calculated decision to waive his right to a jury trial, opting instead to plead guilty to the murder of Officer Gaddis, a choice that intensified scrutiny on his legal representation, the adequacy of his defense, and the broader implications of the case, with prosecutors meticulously outlining the sequence of events, the violent nature of the crime, and the evidence linking Tamayo to the fatal shooting, while his attorneys raised concerns about his intellectual capacity, potential mitigating factors, and the denial of consular access that could have influenced both the trial and sentencing. Interviews. Legal analysts provide in-depth commentary on the courtroom proceedings, explaining the significance of Tamayo's plea, the impact of his defense strategy, the challenges of representing a foreign national with a limited understanding of U.S. legal rights, and the procedural nuances that ultimately shaped the outcome of the trial. International controversy, visuals. Archival footage shows diplomatic protests, news conferences with Mexican officials, statements from the U.S. State Department, and widespread media coverage capturing public reactions, alongside images of maps highlighting Tamayo's nationality and the international ramifications of the case. Narration. Tamayo's conviction and looming execution became an international flashpoint, drawing intense criticism from Mexico, which repeatedly urged the state of Texas to halt the execution on the grounds that Tamayo had been denied access to Mexican consular officials as guaranteed under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, a violation that raised questions about adherence to international law and prompted repeated appeals and statements from the U.S. State Department emphasizing the importance of protecting the rights of foreign nationals. While the case ignited debate over the balance between domestic justice and international obligations, spotlighting the legal, diplomatic, and human rights complexities that intersected in one of the most scrutinized death penalty cases in recent U.S. history. Interviews. Diplomatic experts and human rights advocates provide detailed analysis, explaining the legal arguments behind consular rights, the historical context of international obligations in capital cases, and the broader implications for U.S.-Mexico relations, highlighting how Tamayo's case became emblematic of the tensions between national sovereignty, criminal justice, and the protection of foreign citizens under international law. Final appeals and denials. Archival news footage and close-ups of court documents, emergency filings, and Supreme Court chambers depict the flurry of last-minute appeals, legal briefs being submitted electronically and in print, and lawyers' intense discussions outside the courthouse, interspersed with graphics highlighting Tamayo's intellectual disability claims and international legal arguments. Narration. In the final days leading up to his execution, Edgar Tamayo Arias's legal team mounted a series of last-ditch appeals, presenting evidence of his low IQ, questioning the adequacy of his original defense, and emphasizing the violation of his rights under the Vienna Convention that had denied him timely access to Mexican consular officials. Yet despite the urgency and international attention surrounding these claims, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to grant a stay of execution, leaving the decision in the hands of the state of Texas and underscoring the stark and often uncompromising realities of the American death penalty system, where procedural and jurisdictional boundaries intersect with questions of human rights, diplomacy, and moral responsibility. Interviews. Legal experts provide detailed analysis of the appeals process, explaining the standards for granting stays, the precedent of intellectual disability in death penalty cases, and the court's rationale for denying intervention, while reflecting on the tension between domestic law and international obligations in high-profile capital cases. The execution at Huntsville. Footage of the Huntsville Unit prison exterior, the solemn procession of guards and officials into the execution chamber, and the sterile, somber interior of the chamber itself, intercut with archival images of Tamayo awaiting his fate on death row. Narration. On the morning of January 22, 2014, Edgar Tamayo Arias, 46 years old, was led into the execution chamber at the Huntsville Unit in Texas, his fate sealed by years of legal proceedings, international appeals, and unyielding state decisions. And, as the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered, the gravity of the moment weighed heavily on all witnesses present, encapsulating the convergence of justice, retribution, and human mortality within the cold, clinical walls of the chamber. Interviews. Witnesses recount the execution with precise detail, describing the procedural solemnity, the emotional atmosphere in the room, the measured protocol of the prison staff, and the palpable tension as the life of the convicted man ended under the law's authority. The final words, tight shots through the execution chamber window, showing Tamayo seated, restrained, and calm yet resigned, with the four lines visible and the atmosphere of quiet anticipation around him. Narration. When asked if he wished to make a final statement, Edgar Tamayo Arias, in a quiet and almost imperceptible voice, shook his head and said, "No," signaling the end of a life defined by violence, controversy, and international scrutiny. And, as the lethal injection flowed through his veins, he took a few shallow breaths before fading from consciousness, leaving behind a legacy of questions about justice, the rights of foreign nationals, and the irreversible consequences of one fatal act that forever altered the lives of his victim, Officer Gaddis, and their families, while igniting debates on diplomacy, law, and morality that would continue long after the chamber doors closed. Interviews. Experts and witnesses reflect on the finality of the moment, the emotional and ethical weight carried by everyone in the room, and the chilling simplicity of Tamayo's final refusal to speak, which contrasted starkly with the complex legal and human dramas that preceded his death. If you found this documentary on the Edgar Tamayo Arias case insightful and thought-provoking, take a moment to like this video to show your support, share it with friends, family, or anyone interested in true crime and legal stories that span nations, and comment below with your thoughts, perspectives, or questions about this case, the justice system, and the broader issues of international law, human rights, and capital punishment. Don't forget to subscribe to Crime Report Network and tap The notification bell, so you never miss another in-depth, gripping, and meticulously researched true crime documentary that dives deep into the stories behind the headlines, the lives affected, and the lessons we can all learn from history.